Back to the morning show here on Arise News. I'm Rafah Yassini.
I'm Adeso Almoran.
And I am Shaiton Atigari. Now, the year 2019 marks 20 years of uninterrupted democracy in Nigeria, a country with a population of about 190 million people. And out of the 84 million people registered to vote, only 73 million have voters' cards.
That's the narrative. Over the years, election violence and rigging in Nigeria have been under reduction, but recent indications show that the violence is on the increase in the determination of successful candidates during elections in Nigeria. A typical example, I just tell you this, is just concluded elections in Kogi and Bayelsa state, where many civil society groups have constantly called for cancellation of the outcome of those elections.
Indeed, and more so, some other critics say that Nigeria's democracy just may be under threat, especially with increased violence and deaths witnessed during the November 16th elections in those states. Well, joining us now to review Nigeria's election, particularly from the November 16 Kogi and Bayelsa state elections, is Sefiya Bichi, the pre-election data manager of the Youth Initiative for Advocacy, Growth and Advancement, YIAGA. Sefiya, thank you so much for joining us this morning from our Abuja studios.
Thanks for having me. Good morning.
And very quickly, let's just go right into it. YIAGA Africa is calling for the cancellation of the Kogi elections. The governor, who is also the governor-elect, received his certificate of return yesterday from INEC, but he has said repeatedly that there were pockets of violence and it's not enough to discredit the entire elections. What exactly is it that YIAGA Africa saw in Kogi State that warrants cancellation of the polls? And are you still calling for the cancellation of the polls, especially because he has received his certificate of return?
Okay, first of all, I would like to say that for any election to be accepted, the election is expected to be just credible, to have some level of integrity. And we know that every election is bounded by electoral code. For the Kogi and Bayelsa election, both of them were guided by both the Electoral Act and the INEC guidelines for elections. And we also know that there are some electoral malpractices that if they occur in an elections, that election is not expected to be upheld, even for, most especially for election that is marred with violence. And I would like to say that, yeah, we are still taking our stand on calling for a cancellation of this poll, and for a number of reasons. And I would like to start from the pre-election environment. YIAGA Africa as an institution observe the entire election cycles. We don't start observing elections on election day. And as such, we were on both Kogi and Bayelsa, 8 weeks to the elections, and we've observed the pre-election environment. And some of the findings we got from the pre-election environment and the projections we made were what actually turned out to be true on election day. Not that we're prophets of doom, but what we saw in the pre-election environment, for instance, and if you look at some of our reports, were that there were stockpiling of arms, and we were even able to identify locations where stockpilings were happening. We're able to also identify locations where recruitment of thugs was predominant in both states. And these were some of the indicators of violence we saw ahead of the elections. And we, specifically Kogi as compared to Bayelsa, I'm not saying Bayelsa is good, but what we saw in the pre-election environment was the fact that there were more campaigns in Bayelsa as against Kogi State. And we've also seen political parties and their agents going ahead house to house in some cases to even pay to give advance payment for PVCs on election day. So they'll pay you a sum of money as low as 500 naira. After paying you that, they document your name, your address, polling unit address, and on election day, once you vote, they will go to the polling unit to ensure you comply. Once you vote, then you get the balance. We saw that, and coming back to November 16th, we saw those things happening. It was like we saw it coming, and we actually called on all stakeholders, including political parties, INEC, and security agents, to take steps into that. But coming back to November 16th, November 16th was characterized with a lot of electoral malpractices and also electoral violence. The environment was not conducive for voters to cast their votes truly, and in some cases, the vote of some voters were influenced. And for that kind of elections, you don't expect any organization or any political or electoral expert or observer to uphold that kind of elections, because everything has been influenced from the beginning. Most polling units, a lot of polling units observe violence. And I'll tell you that in my history of observing elections, I've observed more than 10 elections in my life, both in Nigeria and outside Nigeria. And I've never received the number of critical incidents we receive from Kogi State. In Kogi State alone, on election day, we verified... Hello?
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to come in and I just want to say, okay, great, you've said that, but let's interrogate that data. Go ahead with what you were saying. Just go ahead with those data you wanted to put across.
Okay. Oh, okay. In Kogi State specifically, on election day, we verified 69 critical incidents. When I say verify, that is to say there are a lot more that we've received and have not verified. And as you're aware that YIAGA Africa is one of the largest election observation group, in Kogi State alone, we've deployed about 549 polling observers in the entire state. And before the elections, we were in 21 local governments observing the pre-election environment. And this puts us in a better place to provide some of these statistics. But going back to the statistics again, I told you out of this 69, I'm telling you that out of these 69 confirmed critical incidences, the most prevalent ones are vote buying, intimidation and harassment of either voters, polling officials, and even journalists in the same state. And the other one we've also observed, apart from vote buying, was the fact that there were, apart from vote buying intimidation, we've observed sorry, I lost my thought here, but these are the two most prevalent ones we've observed. Maybe if I remember the final one.
Okay, I'll come in
here. Okay, sorry, the third one is ballot is... Okay.
Okay, I'll come in here. You want to say the third one is ballot box snatching, probably. Let me just come in here. And I still want to talk...
Snatching, yeah, and stuffing, yeah.
I still want to come back to the data. I want to interrogate that data even more. The ones you saw. What was the spread like? Was it pervasive along political party lines? Did a certain political party or some political parties have the upper hand in the violence? Did, out of the 69 incident cases you reported, just a minute, did the element of state suffice in aiding and abating that violence? I also want to interrogate further, what was the disposition of the violence? What was the spread according to local government areas?
So the spread was quite much. To be specific, for the 69 critical incidents we observed, it was spread across 20 local governments. That I actually computed that statistics, and I saw 20 local governments were found. We got reports from one or two reports, which is we've got more than one report in each of these 20 local governments. And talking about the perpetrators, yes, political parties were majorly identified and some unidentified groups, but I cannot tell you if it's predominant by one party or the other, because as observers, our responsibility is to ensure that all stakeholders comply to the rule of the game. But I can authoritatively tell you that political parties, and not just one political party, more than one political parties were found wanting in this direction.
Okay, so we are aware that President Muhammadu Buhari has advised those who are not satisfied with the results of the governorship elections in Kogi and Bayelsa states to seek redress in court. Now, you are calling for a full-on cancellation. How do you respond to that? Do you think it's a battle that can be won in the courts? And also looking forward to the 2023 elections, we have to start talking about solutions, seeing as, like my co-host mentioned earlier, the certificate has been presented to the governor or governor-elect.
If you observe, we as an institution, as an observer group, call on for the cancellation way ahead of the conclusion of the elections. Before the election results were announced, we call on for the cancellation. That is to say, if there was an opportunity to also take some step backwards. That was why we went ahead to make a call very early on Sunday around 2 p.m. But again, the president also has his own right to satisfy the elections. And remember that his political party is a party in the elections. And probably he got reports from his political parties, and that informed his decision. But again, we are observer group. We've been there. We're non-partisans. We're independent. And we believe that we're not answerable to political parties, but we hold allegiance to citizens, and that's why we'll go ahead and make our decision or come up with some of this decision based on what we see. But talking about 2023, I think 2023 is even way ahead. Next year we have 2 elections for now. I don't know if there's going to be 1 more or 2 more elections so far, but we know that Edo and Ondo is coming up next year. What do we do? One of the basic steps is electoral reforms. We all need to have citizens' input in this electoral reform this time, and electoral reform should start early so that gaps that were identified in the presidential elections and as well as in this election should be addressed. I regret to say that the last governorship election that held last Saturday turned out to be a lot more not as good as some of the elections that were conducted in the 2019 general elections. We should be seen moving forward as against moving backward. And we need to come up with electoral laws and come up with strong mechanism. One of our recommendations has been unbundling INEC so that some of this can be brought to book. But beyond that, again, we need to engage the security agents more. We've said that in the pre-election environment. Security agents need to be seen taking actions, not just on election day, but for elections, because a lot of times there are indicators of violence. There are indicators of electoral violation, that there are indicators that there will be violation of electoral codes on election day. What are security agents doing? So far, we've not heard of any arrests from either state. People need to see people being called, brought to book, so that it will serve as deterrence, and it will be a way of holding people accountable for their actions.
Bichi, we'll come further to talk about reforms, but I want to ask you 2 quick questions. YIAGA has all of this evidence and data for the calls for cancellation. I want to ask you if you'll be providing this evidence to those who are heading to the tribunal now, or are you, as an organization, challenging these outcomes yourself? And secondly, I would like to bring you to Bayelsa State, but we'll take your responses when we return from this break, Sefiya, because in Bayelsa, I do understand, according to your preliminary submission, that elections did not hold in 25% of polling units in the entire state. Yet, you are not calling for cancellation in that state, but just in Kogi State. So let's go on this break, Sefiya, and then we'll come back to talk some more. Welcome back to the Morning Show here on the Rise News. We still have Sefiya Bichi, the pre-election data manager of Youth Initiative for Advocacy, Growth and Advancement, YIAGA, with us from our Abuja studios. Thank you so much, Sefiya, for staying with us. Before that break, I asked you a couple of questions. First, the evidence you have as an observer group, what are you hoping to do with it? Are you going to be backing up those who are heading to the tribunal? Because we do understand that INEC doesn't have the power to cancel elections, especially once winners have been announced. What are you doing with the evidence you have? And secondly, I was asking you about Bayelsa State, because according to your preliminary submission that I have seen, you have said that there was no election in 25% of polling units in Bayelsa State, but you are not calling for cancellation in Bayelsa. However, YIAGA is calling for cancellation of Kogi elections.
Okay, thank you so much. You know that we are aware that INEC doesn't have the power to cancel an elections. Only the court have the right or powers to do that. And that's why we as an organization went before the conclusion of the elections and draw attention of the commission and all stakeholders to that. But again, we as an organization cannot go to the tribunal, cannot approach the tribunal because we are not party in the process, and as such, we cannot approach the tribunal. And on the other hand, we are non-partisan, so we are not going to say that we're going to be supporting anybody, but our data will be available for anybody that comes to us to apply for it. We've done that in the past. I can tell you that in the 2019 elections, we've had more than 2 parties approaching us to collect evidence from us on the electoral process. So we've always been open to that. We've always provided any party that comes to request for that, whether even public institutions that approach us for our data. Our data is meant to serve the better good of all parties, especially Nigeria as a country. So we're going to be there. Anybody that needs data, he should come and approach us. Going back to Bayelsa State, yes, Bayelsa elections did not hold in some polling units, about 25% polling units in Bayelsa State specifically. And we know that Southern Ijaw was the most affected of all the local government. In fact, all the 8 local governments in Bayelsa State, only 2 local governments were not affected with such incidences. Coming back to YIAGA, our call was that the Electoral Commission should go back and conduct elections in those 25 polling units to provide opportunity for voters in those polling units to exercise their franchise. We don't want election is about inclusion, election is about participation, and not conducting elections in those polling units is to an extent not allowing some voters to exercise their franchise. Again, we know that there are a lot of factors that led to that. We're not saying that we're not aware of that. But again, it is the responsibility of the Commission to go back and conduct some of these elections. In 2019 presidential elections, it happened. There were polling units that the elections did not hold. The elections did not hold on election day. But we've seen the Commission going back on Sunday to conduct elections in those areas. And that was because the problem in Kogi State is different from the problem in Bayelsa State. So we cannot use the same measurement to in Kogi State for Bayelsa State. And as such, we're not calling for cancellation. We're only calling for a revisit to those polling units where elections were not conducted in order to allow voters in those polling units to exercise their franchise.
Okay, Sefiya, I've got 2 quick questions for you. The number 1 question is going to be in the tone of a recommendation, because YIAGA have been collating reports and you have all this data. Are you going to recommend to INEC to sort of have an electoral college unit that researches and uses this data for subsequent elections? And I also want to ask you, the election cycle in Kogi is not over. Only yesterday, Independent National Electoral Commission INEC came out to say that the rerun in 53 polling units in that Kogi West Senatorial District will happen on the 30th of November. We all know that election was declared inconclusive. As YIAGA started collating data as regards Kogi West Senatorial District, and what are the incidence reports you have now leading up, to that election on the 30th of November?
On election day, before November 16th, we've collected on November 16th. But you know that yesterday was when INEC announced the date for the rerun elections. So it's to go back to our drawing board to also look at how we're going to engage the elections. And I can say that because of the announcement that happened just yesterday, the pre-election environment for the rerun just started. So we cannot say that we have so much data on the pre-election environment of the rerun. Again, on the other side, we know that there's a timeline for organizing the rerun elections, and what INEC did falls within the purview of the law, and we have nothing against that. It's just for us to, as an observer group, to also look at what can we do and how can we engage with the lessons drawn from just the from Saturday's election specifically.
Okay, Sefiya,
I think I forgot the other question.
Yes, please go ahead.
The other question was about advocacy and sort of like the recommendations to INEC if they could have sort of like an electoral college, because we keep getting all this data. We have the EU report, we have the OIS report from 2007. We've got all these reports, but like they say, it keeps gathering dust. So if we have sort of like an electoral college, I can interpret this and I can get this out there and really interrogate the data, then maybe we can prevent occurrences of this in the future.
INEC already has an electoral institute that serves that purpose. As an institution, we've been engaging them closely, and we've been engaging INEC too as well. And if you observe, coming from the presidential elections, we as an organization streamline our recommendations to the different sectors. There are some that need electoral reforms, actually. There are some that need policy reforms, and there are some that need enforcement specifically. So INEC, and I think it's something we as our own strategy of beginning to see how we can engage more. We've been engaging with the Electoral Institute since before the 2015 elections, and I would like to disagree with the thoughts around recommendations not working from observer groups. We've done the studies before, and if you also have looked at the progress in our electoral framework, you observe that most of the recommendations are associated with recommendations of observer group. From INEC, on the other hand, even before the 2019 elections, the new guidelines for INEC, YIAGA as an organization analyzed the electoral guideline and came up with feedback, and some of these recommendations were accommodated by the Commission. So I think the value of what observer groups are doing cannot be underemphasized, more especially with their report. But the problem is that our electoral system or space is always evolving, and what we ask all stakeholders to do is to evolve with the evolvement. Whenever there are laws or guidelines to curtail some electoral malpractices, we see some stakeholders or parties in the elections coming up with ways to undermine it. So I think what we should do as people, as electoral people, members of the political or electoral society, is to come up with plans to make us to be way ahead of it. Some of them are through electoral reform. Some of them are through enforcement, and a lot more.
Okay, Sefiya, I'd like to, since we're still talking about electoral reforms, I'd like to talk about the enfranchisement of Nigerians in the diaspora. We are aware that we have about 15 million Nigerians living in various parts of the world, and there have been attempts by the Independent National Electoral Commission to allow for diaspora voting. However, it's still crawling, as we would say. In your opinion, do you think that the Nigerian Electoral Commission is ready for enfranchising Nigerians in the diaspora to help more citizens living outside the country to be part of a democratic process?
First of all, our legal framework does not allow that. And when you talk about Nigeria and the diaspora, it's not like they cannot vote in the elections. The only problem is that they can only vote when they come back to the country and to any polling unit they might have registered to vote. And we know that this is inconvenience for anyone. And I as a person, I take a step backward when it comes to talking about diaspora voting too. First of all, going to putting mechanisms that are possible for diaspora voting. If there's no online voting, if there's no e-voting, it will be difficult for us to accommodate diaspora voting. So it's to go back to the drawing board and see how we can include electronic voting and all other voting processes that will be convenient, that will allow them. Because we can come up with a law by saying that, oh, Nigerian diaspora can vote, but if we don't come up with a law that provide enabling environments for them to carry out their franchise, then we are going to be left behind. And these are all what we should all discuss in the electoral framework, and also look at what are the structures we have on ground that will enable that. Because laudable laws are very good. We also need to look at mechanisms that will ensure we fulfill or comply with those laws.
Sefiya, since we are talking about framework, I'd like to take you back to the issue of cancellation, because you called for cancellation for Kogi State and the powers that INEC has or should have. There's a submission, and I've put this to almost everybody since after the elections I've interviewed, that Nigerian politicians will win at all costs, just because they understand that INEC doesn't have the power to cancel polls, and so everybody goes to the courts. And it is difficult to obtain or get justice, as politicians would tell you, in the courts, because it's difficult to prove. So my question really is, do you think, in considering electoral reforms, we should be giving INEC that powers? Because, again, there are those who would say, would that power not be abused by INEC? What do you think? Should INEC have the power to cancel? Because you're calling for cancellation. Who do you want to cancel the elections? If you do understand that only the courts can opt on these elections. So it's a lot there, I know, but we'll go for another break and come back for you to answer that question. Sefiya Bichi, stay with us. Welcome back, everyone, to the show. Sefiya Bichi, the pre-election data manager of Youth Initiative for Advocacy, Growth and Advancement. YIAGA is in our Abuja studios. Thank you so much, Sefiya Bichi, for staying with us. I asked you a question before that break. You've had some time to think about it. What's your thoughts? Should INEC be given the powers? And would it not be abused?
So you asked me practically two questions. The other one is, we know that INEC doesn't have the powers, and that's why we call on for cancellation much earlier before the announcement of the result. The powers goes to the court after election results are announced, and that's what we're aware of, and that's why we went ahead. But again, should the powers be given to INEC? We're at the moment talking about unbundling the elections, INEC. So probably after unbundling INEC, these powers can be given to whoever. We're talking about unbundling INEC, coming up with a new commission that will help address issues around electoral offenses. So we cannot be at the same time talking about adding more responsibilities to INEC. Probably to come up with guidelines, if that will be even given to the new commission, which I don't see, because again, you're taking away the role or the work of electoral tribunals from them, because if INEC can cancel elections, that's nullifying elections to an extent after being announced. What happens to the electoral tribunal? But this is a matter of political and legal debate. But I would like to say that except INEC is unbundled, before we begin to think of adding an additional responsibility to INEC. At the moment, INEC is overstretched. We should reduce some of these responsibilities to them. INEC has the responsibility of registering political parties, deregistering political parties, prosecuting electoral reforms, managing election administration, and lots more, until we unbundle them before we begin to think of other additional responsibilities we should add to INEC. But I think there's a lot to do. We all need to just go back and look at what are the pros and cons, because sometimes we make recommendations for some things and the next minute we go back crying, looking at the impact. And also to do a survey of what is happening in other clients and see what is applicable there. Are there good practices we can learn? So far, I personally will have to look at that, probably on next time when I'm on the show, to come up with those recommendations.
Okay, I mean, that's a very touchy situation because, like they say in the tribunals, election petition itself, it's a case of sui generis. I mean, deciding this, it's in a class of its own. But I just pretty much want to go along those lines of thought that you have started as regards how a very touchy situation it is. And vis-a-vis what we know that is on ground that nobody's even talking about now, the Election Act that was supposed to be signed, that's also supposed to be ascertained by the president, that has not been assented all this while, owing to the fact that we know that elections are coming up next year. You talked about Ondo, you talked about Edo. And secondly, I also want to put this, put a cat among the pigeons by saying, have you guys done iterations? Have you done research to show that maybe the silver bullet that might just ameliorate most of this challenge will be electronic voting? Going the electronic way. You talked about other climes. Somaliland, for instance, I monitored their elections to a certain extent that there's a form of electronic voting. People are scanned with their irises. What's your take on this?
I think it's beyond electronic voting. Electronic voting is not the silver bullet to this, because if violence prevails, no matter the equipment you put for electronic voting, you can have talks stealing the machines. You can have talks depriving voters from going to the vote to cast their votes. But again, electronic voting is one step, but there are lots more to addressing some of these issues, as we said. And if you have also looked at it, electoral violence has been on the increase in our society. We need to address that specifically. And aside that, I will agree that electronic voting will help, but only at electronic voting as a reform, it won't solve all the problems. But again, going back to electoral reforms, I know that just this week, if I'm not mistaken, the electoral reform is on the way. I don't want to say what I'm not sure, but I think it has been enlisted on the floor of one of the chamber of the National Assembly to start. So for anyone that is interested in engaging the electoral reforms, the person should start now, because this assembly is working towards that. We know that the last bill was with the last assembly, and you know that a bill ends at the end of the assembly, but with their new procedure in the National Assembly, this assembly can continue with the former bill. We don't know, but it's for all parties that are interested in electoral reforms to look at. And I want to also note that electronic voting have its own challenges, and the challenges comes in when mechanisms for it are not put on ground. But I also like to note that in Africa, that's where all countries are moving on to electronic voting. In Ghana, in their last election, and other countries, we've seen electronic transmission moving, and we know that from electronic transmission, it will go to electronic voting. But again, we need to build the infrastructure. UK, their first electronic voting faced a lot of challenges. Ireland, I have not verified that. Even the last election faced a little challenges. So infrastructure, do we have enough infrastructure? This is what we should be looking at before we make the reforms. Let's not go ahead of us. Let's have the infrastructure while we think of the reforms. But electronic transmission will also be one of the ways, because we know that, as we highlighted in our statement for Bayelsa State, we said the weakest link in the election day process was the coalition process. And if there could be a transmission process that will avoid people tampering with the results from the polling unit, then some of these issues will be addressed. But these are some of the things we also...
Hello? Sefiya, can you still... Okay, so I'm going to... we've spoken about e-voting and, transmission, but I want to talk about the adequate preparation of of INEC, because postponing elections have somewhat become a tradition. It's something that has occurred every year since 2011. Now, on the heels, like you've mentioned, we have the Edo State elections coming up next year. What about the preparedness of INEC? It seems as if once we have an election, we're so focused trying to either cancel or go to the tribunal. However, there's no breakdown of how this team is going ahead to make sure that the next elections they are prepared for. The last one, they gave the problems to be logistical and operational. How can we make sure that they are ready in time for such elections?
INEC just need to improve on what they did with Kogi and Bayelsa. To be fair on INEC brought up a timetable very early, and INEC complied with the timetable, comply substantially with the activities on their timetable. For Bayelsa, for Kogi State, at around 7:30, about 52% of pool officials were there. But again, we know that elections are conducted within a context. And that's why in the pre-election environment, when we began to see some of these negative indicators, we call on the attention, because no matter how adequately INEC prepare, no matter what INEC puts on ground, if the context is not favorable, the process will be marred. All I would like to say is that INEC should improve on what they did with Kogi and Bayelsa. They complied with their timetable. I can tell you that between last week of September to first week of October, we have observers, people from all the local governments were confirming that preparatory activities are ongoing. But coming back to the rerun, INEC knows the law. The law, we know that before now, I think the rerun was after 30 days, but now 60 days. So INEC knows the law. So as an organization, even us as observers, sometimes we come up with backup plan. What if there is a rerun? What should we do? So INEC should have come with a backup plan in case this happens. And we've also seen INEC share on their website some of the security analysis and hotspot places they shared. So I don't think they should have any issue, because the election is in a fewer polling unit. as against what they had in November 16. And since they know the law, they should be able to put this in, they should be able to do this more stress-free. What I would like to say is that other stakeholders, security agents, should be seen active this time around to prevent that, because I'm telling you that perpetrators will not fold their arms. We've seen what happened in Kano in 2019 governorship elections. So we need to also look at that and to call on political parties, because the truth is that they are the major perpetrators, to also call on them and let them know that they're there because of the citizens. And if they always endanger the life of the citizens, then there's no point having them as representatives. They need to be called to book, and whoever is found wanting should be prosecuted.
I'm glad that you have said this, because the outcome of an election is not just on INEC alone. There are other stakeholders. And I'd like to take you back to what happened in Kogi State. And that's because the Inspector General of Police has made a statement concerning what happened. He says it was as a result of fake policemen. You pride yourself as one of the largest observer groups, election observer groups in Nigeria. What did you see in Kogi State? I mean, there were 35,200 policemen deployed for the elections. Did you see fake policemen?
Yeah, we saw lots of security agents in polling units. I think almost all, about 90%, something percent of polling units has presence of security agents. And what remained worrisome was the fact that some of this intimidation and harassment were happening right in front of security agents. In a few cases, they made attempt to salvage the situation. In other cases, they fold their arms and we were watching it. And that's why security agents were saying that they need to act. It's not about deploying 35,000. If the 35,000 are not doing anything, then there's no point deploying the 35,000. But going back to fake police, we've also got reports. But again, it's difficult to verify, because if a fake police is carrying on ammunition, if a fake police is wearing the same uniform as the Nigerian police, I don't think we're yet to have the expertise to differentiate the fake and the fake police, most especially when they probably carry a badge. But we've also not seen so much of them of them in polling units, and most of the intimidations that happen and are alleged to be by fake police were on the were at stop points and other things. So the police is aware of this. If the police is saying that they are fake police, the question we should be posing is that what are they doing? And is it that there were no information or intelligence around that before the elections? So this is something we should be calling on the police, because they are the police. They know who is fake. If I see someone that is not from YIAGA, I should be able to know that the person is not from YIAGA, even by the code. The person
well, I'd like to say a very big thank you to you, Sefiya, for your time and talking to us about sundry issues around the last elections in Kogi and Bayelsa. So thank you so much.